Hey psychos, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I've got a great guest coming in from the border of Texas and Arkansas, Sterlin Lujan. He was involved, or might still be involved, in a really popular webpage on Facebook called The Art of Not Being Governed. He's also started up his own page called The Psychologic Anarchist. It's doing quite well on Facebook, already has over 20,000 views. And he has a lot of really interesting insights into different ways to look at anarchy and different ways we can sort of bring people into anarchy. And it's sort of unbelievable to me still in this day and age, or maybe it's never happened before, that people didn't know about freedom, or maybe this is the first time we're trying to wake people up to it. It's quite mind-boggling to me that anyone doesn't already know this from the time they're born. And actually, I actually think people do know this when they're born, but they get quickly snapped out of it and put into the matrix and propaganda and control systems and the media quickly makes them fall into line as slaves. So he's got a really interesting sort of ways in talking about what that we can get people to wake up more to anarchy. And I liked it so much that we've invited him to become a speaker at the upcoming Anarchapulco 2017 conference coming up at the final week of February. We haven't fully announced it yet, but we will be soon. So really interesting. So I'm expecting this is going to be a really interesting Anarchast episode with Sterlin. And so let's get started, Sterlin. Before we get started, though, I have to make sure you're a decent person. How did you become an anarchist?
Oh yeah, you're going to love this. Thanks for asking, Jeff. Okay, well, I grew up out in West Texas, and early on, I didn't have any type of political leaning. I didn't really do any type of serious thinking in my younger years. What ended up happening was, as I grew up in this small town, I eventually got out of there, and then I moved to a little bit larger of a town. And what happened was, one day one of my buddies invited me over to his house, and he said, "Listen, I have something for you. I have something that you need to try." He said, "You're going to love it." And I said, "Well, what is this that you want me to try?" He said, "Well, it's a drug. It's a chemical compound." And and I had smoked pot before. I'd been drinking, but that never really did anything for me as far as like psychoeducational or do any kind of deconditioning to get me out of the matrix. What he actually had was MDMA. So, and these particular MDMA tablets were called red quotation marks. So what I did, I took MDMA, and it was a real intimate environment, which is the way that I love to enjoy that compound to this day. But I had a complete mind-blowing awakening. On that compound, one of the main insights that I had was that I'm a lot smarter than I've been told my whole life, or I can do a lot more than I've believed that I had the ability to do. So immediately after using the compound, I went and this is still prior to becoming an anarchist, just FYI, I went to the library and got a library card, and I just started reading books. And I remember the first book that I got, and it was a completely just the wrong damn choice. I got Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, and I read that, and I thought it was an amazing read at the time, but Nietzsche's now I think is pretty crazy and full of shit. But I kept reading his stuff. I read a little bit about physics. I got on, and this is when Wikipedia was really exploding. And I got on Wikipedia and I just bounced between links and learned everything that I could. And then, of course, the thought occurred to me that, you know what, this pill has the capacity to wake people up and make people want to achieve more. I got interested in psychology. I decided I wanted to go to school, which I did for a psychology undergraduate. And I did get my bachelor's degree. So what this culminated in was me thinking, man, I can wake people up with this. This is a good thing. This is not what society has taught me about these drugs. It's not this. They're not this evil chemical that's just going to destroy my mind, make me fail, and make me, turn into an addict piece of shit. So what I decided to do was, I think I'm gonna, I want to give these to a couple of my friends and, and see what they think about it. And I did that in intimate environments, and we had these really amazing spiritual experiences. And then a little later down the road, I'm going to jump ahead because this is a long story with a lot of details, but I decided to keep a box in my house and this box was from a known drug dealer, quote unquote. And anyway, what happened was this guy sold to some undercover agents, and the undercover agents came to my house with a warrant. This was out in West Texas, and my house was raided by a fully geared with machine gun SWAT team, and I was thrown to the ground with a gun to my head, and I was threatened with 40 years in prison. And I remember during the episode it was happening, I had already had these thoughts about how much bullshit the war on drugs were, and I had all this adrenaline flowing through me, and I was telling these guys what a piece of shit they were and that they were the bad guys. And I asked them, I said, hey, do you remember Prohibition? Do you remember when alcohol was banned? You know, you're essentially those same cops who were in the wrong now invading me and wanting to kidnap me and take me to a cage, which is what happened. They drugged me to a cage, and I remember the bond was quite high, higher than sometimes for murderers and people who commit acts of manslaughter. I think it was crazy. I think it was like $8,000 or something and I was able to get out because I had a loving family who actually did care about me. Of course, they thought that I made a mistake because they were living under the delusion or the illusion of statism. So I got out of jail at that time, and then I had to find the best attorney in town to try to combat this, which is unfortunate because that was another several $1,000s, down the drain based on their racket that they have on the war on drugs, quote unquote. And at that point, I moved out of town and I moved toward East Texas, and to try to get out of that area and then look like I was going to be the good guy and I was going to make penance, because at this point in time, again, I still wasn't an anarchist, and I was flooded with feelings of guilt because everyone tried to tell me that I was this evil guy, and some people, of course, who were closer to me said, oh, you just made a mistake. But in retrospect, of course, I didn't make any mistakes. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't harm anybody. I didn't commit any acts of aggression. So the story gets even more difficult and more, it just as shitty as it gets. And everybody knows that Texas is like the worst of the worst when it comes to drugs. There are a bunch of authoritarian control freaks down here. So what ended up happening, they came and arrested me again, and they charged me with a conspiracy to peddle drugs across multiple cities and multiple counties in Texas. So they arrested me again. They came to my house again and arrested me, and all because they said that they could trace the drugs, by the way, which ended up being MDMA, cocaine, and a smorgasbord of other fun pills. But they kidnapped me again for that, and then they said because that passed through a certain county, that county could then press charges on me. So it was a clever legal loophole for them to commit essentially double jeopardy for the same crime. So you already see how corrupted this is. So these little Texas counties can generate revenue based on people who don't do anything wrong and who don't hurt anybody. So again, I had to pay, and this time the bond was even higher. It was something like, I want to say $10,000 or so after I got it. So I ended up getting out. I got on probation. I'm going to rewind just a bit. It took a year to go to trial, and during that year, on waiting to go to trial, that is when I started reading Rothbard, and I started really questioning the system. I read Rothbard, I found Molyneux online, I read Larkin Rose's book, and I found all these other individuals in the liberty and anarchist community, and I learned that what I had done, quote unquote, was not something that was bad. It was not something that was evil, and I shouldn't feel guilty. I shouldn't feel that I need to make a penance for what I did. There was no sin committed. The only sin committed was on the end of the cops who aggressed against me and tried to hurt me, and who made my life literally a living hell. So that is where the real transition to anarchism started, and I've been going full speed ahead since then. And after I got on, fast forward now, after I got on probation, a year later when I went to trial, the attorneys, of course, were able to work it out where all the charges ran concurrently. And I convinced them that after I got on probation, I convinced them 5 years down the road, after being a good boy, quote unquote, I wrote a letter to the judge, and he said that I would that I was good since I followed all the rules, and I'm now off of probation after all that time and all that heartache, all that money, and then all the indecency and inhumanity of having to go, piss in a cup every month and having probation officers come to my house and harass me. So that's a little bit of the story and some details. It's the first fully fleshed out version I think I've been able to give. So.
Wow, what a story! So you're the first one. Well, I guess I would. From what I understand, you sort of got out of the matrix a little bit by taking a small red pill, and that sort of made you wake up and realize that you're not just a slave, you're not just a cog in the machine, you're not what you're told by the media and the schools and everything, that you're just another one, or not like the whole grand thing that they have, that we're just one of a trillion universes in the whole universe, and we're just a speck of dust and we're nothing and all that kind of stuff. That's the whole thing they're trying to ingrain. So you took a little pill once, that kind of woke you up and you said, hey, I am someone, I am something.
I can
do things. I have a soul. I am somebody. For that, you were SWAT teamed, gun to your head, raided, your life almost ruined. And that's when you started to think about things even more, and that's when you became an anarchist. So really interesting story. So you sort of became an anarchist by taking a red pill and then having the state quite literally in your face, and almost ruining your life, like 40 years in jail for taking a little pill that made you kind of wake up a little bit. Incredible story, amazing story, and that's what they do. That's what the whole thing is set up to do. And these cops, we've had Barry Cooper on. Amazing guy. This guy, if you guys haven't seen the Anarchast with Barry Cooper, you got to check it out. If you don't know Barry Cooper, go on his Facebook page, check out his videos. He was one of the top drug cops in the U.S., and he worked really hard at it, and he thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was, saving the country by trying to find people who had plants in their house, which is insane. Like, just think about that for 1 sec. Everyone just think about this whole thing, and all the people dead, we're talking probably millions now with the drug war, and all the people caged, we're talking definitely millions, who've been kidnapped and put into rape camps because of plants. That's just insane to begin with, but that's the whole system. And so one day he woke up and he smoked marijuana once, and he said, this is what I've been ruining people's lives for. And he completely, total credit to him, he was willing and able to change. And he said, I'm going to go on the other side. He started busting cops. He started busting cops to the point where he had to flee the country because they were trying to go after him, because if you stand up to the system, they will try to put you in a cage or kill you. And especially in the U.S., that's where it's the worst. You're in ground zero. Well, North Korea is probably worse. I haven't been there, though, so I can't say. But from what I've heard, it might be worse. But that's about it. That's about the only country I can think of that, well, maybe Cuba a little bit. Yeah, there's a couple, maybe, that are worse than the U.S. But amazing story. So you've gone down this path, and now you're really, I would almost say you're becoming a bit of a thought leader. I can see, when I see you writing, I can see these are different ways of looking at things that no one else has ever really quite said before. And that's, a person like Larkin Rose, who you said was one of the people, one of his books really woke you up to all of this. He's in my opinion, like a true thought leader. Like, right. He's just constantly showing things in a different light that no one's thought of before, that just wakes people up. So you're starting to do that now, which is awesome. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. Right. With the psychological anarchist and things like that.
Right. Well, like I said, I went and after the MDMA experience, one of my immediate passions was trying to understand the human mind and the human brain, the mind-brain complex. So psychology was automatically, appealing to me. So what I did was go into, I got my degree, like I said, bachelor's degree. I'm working on my master's degree currently. And I hate to work within the system, but in order to do a counseling program, you have to follow all the state mandates and play by their rules. And I think that'll eventually change. We can get into more of that maybe in a bit. But as I've been taking my counseling classes, I've actually been really influenced by the psycho-emotional and the socio-emotional elements that are involved in counseling and relating to people, and the importance of appealing to emotion on an interpersonal and a relational, or from an interpersonal relational aspect. So what I've done is I've taken those ideas from counseling psychology, and I said, well, what happens if I apply these ideas to anarchism? And the immediate thing that came to my mind was, this is a it's about building relationships with people. It's about communicating with people and having an impact on people in that way. And as I was writing in my journal and I was really thinking about these ideas, this concept of relationalism came to mind. And relationalism has been called a couple of different things. It's called soft anarchism or therapeutic anarchism. And what it's about creating anarchist communities that are based on love, compassion, and attachments with other humans. Whereas other forms of anarchism or voluntarism are based on really hammering home the logical points, looking at the economic vectors or the moral vectors, and then attempting to persuade people with logical rhetoric to get involved in anarchism. But I see a problem with this, and that problem is that this element precludes, or this form of voluntarism precludes making a connection with people. And what I've learned from counseling people and working with people in a deeply interpersonal way is that in order to get people to connect with you and to understand what you're getting at, you have to be able to make an emotional connection with that person. You have to exhibit a kind of love with that individual. And here's where some of this comes from. In counseling psychology, there's a concept called the therapeutic alliance. And all that means is that the counselor makes a connection with the client so that the client actually trusts the counselor. And there's some evidence, some research-based evidence behind the therapeutic alliance that said it is responsible for the most positive outcomes in a counseling. It's not any kind of brilliant intervention that the counselor does in the therapeutic setting. It's simply based on the deep relationship. And that's why the counselor is able to help influence that individual to really help themselves, to look at their own lives, to explore their own soul, and to come out the other end as a positive person who's able to take control of their lives and have a little bit of self-responsibility. So that's one of the main, really the underpinning element of relationalism or therapeutic or soft anarchism.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and you made a great point that so many anarchists out there who are trying to change things, and I love it, are just mostly using the logic angle. And here's the problem with just using logic with people. People aren't logical. They're not rational. Right. 98% of people today, thanks to the government indoctrination camps, and thanks to the mainstream media, and thanks to the dumbing down, the Floridization, all that sort of stuff, they have no ability to think logically. They are drones. We're literally living in the Matrix.
Right.
These people, imagine you're in the movie The Matrix with Keanu Reeves walking down the street, and you just try to use logic. You try to say, hey, have you ever noticed that you're living in this machine and all this sort of stuff? Those people on the street, they do the same thing as people in the U.S. would today, or many other countries. They just look at you like you're crazy. So the logical argument, while good, and we need that argument, of course, if we can't make that argument, we shouldn't even be involved in doing any of this, but it's not how we're going to convince most people today to come to anarchy. And the other aspect that I really like is that most people, not all, but most people today are really damaged, hurt people. This world that we live in, this society that's based on violence and based on theft, which is government, and has all these people all around always watching you and telling you you're bad, like they told you were really bad because you took a red pill once. These people are just, they're trained just to go, they go through their 16 years of education, which teaches them nothing. They get out, they got a piece of paper, they got a whole bunch of student debt. They're told, okay, now go get a job, and they go and apply, and they sit in a cubicle. These people are destroyed. They're so damaged, and not to mention, so many of them are probably sexually abused when they're younger. And these people, most people, and most people watching this even are not. Well, actually, not most, because many of you have sort of started to heal yourself and wake up. But many people are so hurt and damaged and confused, and so logic isn't going to work. They need a connection, actually, and that's what they're missing in their lives. There's so little connection. That's one of the other things I don't like about being in the U.S. and things like that. Seems like there's no connection. That's why I prefer more in Mexico. There's more of like a family, and people connect, and people actually ask you how you're doing, and they actually care and
Right.
things like that. So that's why I think your angle's really got some things that we should definitely be looking at.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate that. And I think and that's sort of the insight that I've got. When I started coming down the path of anarchism, back then, while I was on probation, and when I was really thinking about it, and I was looking I was trudging through all of the online, the videos, the libraries, the books. Pretty much everything was coming from the logical angle, and I could tell that that this is, and a lot of times the logical angle is actually it's underpinned by deep emotionality, like specifically a lot of anger and a lot of rage. And people automatically have an emotional reaction to that. And this is one of the things, whenever you go at people with the hard logic and you get aggressive with it, it triggers people, and it puts them on the defensive, right? The brain is flooded with cortisol. People enter the fight or flight. And when they enter fight or flight, they're not interested in learning anything. Learning is actually inhibited because of this type of brain activity. So you
actually cause the opposite of what you're trying to do, because what you're trying to do with the logic is trying to wake them up. But if you're coming at them aggressive with the logic, you're actually doing the opposite. They're going to fight you to their death right. to make sure that they don't ever understand what you're talking about, because they feel threatened.
Right. And this goes back to a little bit what we were talking about earlier, or you mentioned about the state in regards to how people are indoctrinated and brought up and their emotions are completely destroyed. It's the truth of the typical voluntarist saying that statism starts at home. So here's one of the things we've learned in psychology. There's this idea of it called attachment theory, and attachment theory just states that the better attachment we have with our primary caregivers in our younger years is what allows us to grow into complete and full human beings with a good, highly functioning emotional system so we don't get triggered often. It's real funny because I wasn't brought up in a perfect environment, but I wasn't spanked or hit by my mother, which is definitely a good thing. But it really surprises people, I think, online and in person when I talk to them. And I'll make a comment about the state, and their immediate reaction is to be aggressive, because that's how they were raised, and that's the way that the intergenerational transmission of how they've seen to solve problems has occurred in their life. So they're really surprised when I react in a very peaceful and a very calm manner. And what I try to do is, in the spirit of counseling, I try to enter into their system. I try to get on board with the way that they're thinking, and then I try to deeply empathize and connect with them before even thinking about making the rational argumentation, using the logic. And like you said, that's super important. And one of the concepts that I have in relationalism is called the hard and soft continuum. And all that means is that there's different kinds of anarchists, and most of them are on the harder end of the spectrum. And the harder end just means that they're more used to trying to appeal to strict reasoning, even though they may underpin it with emotions. And what I'm just saying is that we need to dial it down and be more toward the emotional end of the spectrum. It's the same thing as what a lot of the spiritual anarchists are trying. There's a lot of spiritual elements in the anarchist movement that seem to be cropping up right now. And you've talked to a lot of different people, Jeff, on your show who embody this. So all I've done is take the psychological principles and create an emotional framework for people to work from, so it's not as disconnected. Maybe it's a very clear way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up another good point about the connections, the bonds that we make when we're very young. That's another thing that this whole system has been trying to propagate. It's been in place now for more than a century with the Rockefeller Foundation, trying to get the women into the workforce. I'm not saying women shouldn't be in the workforce. I'm saying that's their plan, is to get all women into the workforce so that they're not with their kids. And now they're talking about having kids in their kindergarten when they're 2. They shouldn't even be going to public schools at all, but to have them when they're 2 years old, they're really trying to get them at the earliest level to get them into the statist indoctrination. It's truly a cult. It's truly a religion. It's nothing more than that, but it essentially is a cult. So we live amongst cult members, essentially, literally millions and millions of them, and we're trying to figure out how we can, because we know the cult eventually will kill us all, or at the very least, they'll ruin our lives completely, which they already almost did with you, and they've done with so many of my past guests who've been in rape camps and put into solitary confinement for nothing, and through things like their whole statist system, the central banking. They're impoverishing us all. So at the very least, we want to try to wake them up, if only for our own self-protection, if only for our own self-interest, because we have to live here too amongst this cult that is all over the world, but most egregiously in the U.S. right now. It's like, I can't even, I have a hard time going there anymore. It's really like just going into, the craziest cult ever and trying to live amongst it as a person who can see that it's a cult. I know you can probably understand what I'm talking about, but for me, having lived outside of it more now, where it's a little less culty, down here in Mexico, and people hate the cops. They actually kill the cops here most of the time. A lot of people go, oh, it's pretty dangerous down there. And I'm like, why? What happened? They're like, I heard that a bunch of people just killed a bunch of cops. And I'm like, well, that's not dangerous to me. I don't promote violence. I don't want to see any violence, but I don't see how that's of any danger to me that's happening. But I think you're totally right, though, the emotional angle, the connection angle. That's the thing. Like, I've seen so many videos on YouTube and stuff of people just going up to a homeless person. And of course, there's a million homeless people, especially in the US, and some of them all have each of their own different issues. But most of the time, if someone just goes up and talks to them and spends like 1 minute kind of interested or in them, they're like, thank you. I don't even want your money. No one's talked to me in like months, we're so disconnected, and that's what they want to do. They want to keep us all disconnected and all over the place. If we can just come together and empathize and connect more with each other, we'll have a lot better chance of breaking this mind control.
Right. And that, it brings a thought up. That's another reason why the culture that we live in is really, most people really shun these psychedelic compounds. They really shun the red pill that I took, the MDMA, because of the emotional facet, right? It's not just the fact that these are chemicals that they don't like for whatever reason because of monetary reasons. I really think that it's because it opens people up to actually be able to connect with one another. And MDMA especially, I was involved really early on in the rave scene. And the rave scene out in West Texas, when it was really humming, was one of the some of the most amazing interpersonal experiences that I've ever had with strangers. There were hardly any fights at those events. All types of people, transgendered people, older people, people with all kinds of disabilities, sick people. It doesn't matter who you are, what ethnicity you come from, what type of person you are. If you came to those events, you were able to fit in. You could dance and not feel like people were judging you. So it was a really loving, a really heartfelt community. And I would like to see a kind of imitation of that in normal everyday life, not necessarily on that particular compound. And we know that it's possible because all MDMA compound does is it creates a mass dump of serotonin in the brain. So serotonin does have some responsibility for making people happy, for keeping people up and excited. So that's one of the things that really I think we could emulate, because we already have the necessary compounds in our biology.
Yeah, absolutely, including DMT. And I haven't told anyone this, but I did DMT a couple of weeks ago. That was very interesting and something I needed a little bit. So I've now, in the last couple of years, I've done ayahuasca, iboga, mushrooms, Cambo, but that's not really a psychedelic, and then DMT. And they've all been actually very helpful to me. In fact, iboga changed my life. It rebooted my entire system, and I think these compounds are incredibly valuable. I think that everyone needs to at least be exposed at some level to something like that. That's what can kind of break you out of what's going on, and that's why they make them all illegal in places like the U.S. And even marijuana, to an extent, sort of kind of makes people think a little bit, and that's why they actually like the alcohol. That's why that's all over the place in the U.S. Yeah, drink up, everyone drink, because it kind of dumbs you down. It kind of makes you kind of stupid for a while, and that's what they want. So yeah, I think there's that whole angle as well. If you look at a lot of these older cultures, that was actually their sort of rite of passage, was doing something like ayahuasca. And, my kids are only 11 and 9 now, and I'm not thinking about getting them to do ayahuasca or anything at this point. But I do think once they become adults, I will have that conversation. And I will say there are things that can kind of give you new insights that are kind of interesting. And, it's your choice. I never push anything on anybody. But I think these things, if used more in our sort of cultures, and it's sort of interesting. You got almost put away for 40 years for MDMA, which I believe psychologically psychologists used to use in the 1930s and 40s. I might be off on the exact dates and times. And then they were having all kinds of good experiences with it, and then they made that all illegal because, of course, that started to wake people up.
Right. Yeah, I think MDMA was originally synthesized in 1919, but then it went real underground and not a lot of people used it. But then psychiatrists and psychologists, it really caught on in the 50s and the 60s. And I know one particular psychologist, he was Chilean actually, and his name was Claudio Naranjo, and he wrote a book called The Healing Journey. And he used the MDMA in couples counseling with great success and great efficacy. And we can see why, because the compound, first of all, it dissolves any kind of communication boundaries between people, and people are able to connect and empathize with each other in ways that were previously alien to them, simply because of the ways that they grew up under the state, under non-peaceful parenting, and under this idea that might makes right and violence is the way to solve problems. So MDMA is a compound that completely obliterates this. And to kind of relate that back to relationalism, really, that is where my philosophy, I would say, stemmed from. That's where it originated from, this idea that we can live like this. I know we can live like this. We've experienced it. We can do it. And I try to model that in my everyday life with people. I try to model it in how I interact with people, because I think it's an absolutely beautiful thing, and we have to be able to we have to be able to live like that, or as a species it's not going to be pretty over the next couple of days. And this is why anarchism, I think, is starting to crop up, and we're starting to realize these things. It's making sense that what we're doing now is unsustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally unsustainable. I remember when I was younger, way before I even knew what anarchy was or anything, although I think I was an anarchist, I just didn't know what the word was or never thought about the philosophy. But I remember looking at the Middle East, which is constantly in war, still is right now, even worse than it has been in a long time. And I said when I was like in my 20s, I said they should just do an airship drop of MDMA, ecstasy, because I had done it myself at a rave. And the first thing you always say when you do MDMA, the first thing that comes out of your mouth is, well, first of all, the first thing is, we should do this every day. And then the second thing is, I love everybody. Right. I love you. It's just like this love starts pouring out. It's an interesting thing that happens when you take it. And I said, they should just airdrop MDMA into Israel and Palestine, and the whole war would be over the next day. And actually would be, but actually now what I've discovered is that most people in Israel and Palestine, not all, but most, don't want these wars. This is all actually imposed on people. But I've realized it's a much bigger problem than that. We have to get rid of the governments and the central banks and start to wake people up to want to get rid of those things to fix these problems. But I already had that idea in my head. And, it's funny too, also watching a lot of these really anti-marijuana people. They're usually from a religious background, and they're usually not even close to, they'll say they're Christian, and they're like the opposite of Christians. They don't believe anything that Jesus believed in. Like, I think it was Gandhi who said, I really liked your Jesus, but your Christians, they don't seem to be much like him. But you'll see them, and they'll go on their shows and stuff, and they'll say, oh, marijuana, it's the devil, it'll ruin the world. It's like, those are the people who need to do marijuana so bad. like those are the exact people who we should somehow find a way just to sneak it into their food or something. Like, seriously, I'm talking seriously here. Like, just those kind of people, just put some into their food, put some mushrooms in there or something. They won't even know what happened. It'll be funny. And then the next day they'll be like, I don't know why I've been so screaming about all this stuff. What happened? I don't know why I was so aggressive and angry and violent and wanted to rule people and all this sort of stuff. Right. Seriously, the government's talking about putting in certain other chemicals other than fluoride, which is a total poison, into the water supply. They're talking about putting in these other things to kind of make people, they're putting in these antidepressants because everyone's depressed because they live as total slaves. Why don't we start sneaking in MDMA into water? Let's get outside of the box here on how we can change things.
Right. Well, and you're absolutely right about the possibility of these compounds being change agents. We know that in the 60s, one of the primary reasons that the government lost its mind, that the people who went really crazy were the people not using LSD, because they started seeing all these anti-war protesters crop up, all these anti-cultural, countercultural groups crop up saying, something is really fucked up here. We need to start looking at things a bit differently. And of course, this is when the drug war really kicked into gear. They went super aggressive on trying to get, LSD off the streets, all the chemists off the streets. And if you remember, Timothy Leary was really promoting this idea of turn on, tune in, and drop out, which makes a lot of sense because you don't want to be tuned in to this shit culture that we currently live in. So Leary was onto something. Unfortunately, part of what he was doing, it amplified the spotlight that the government had on these compounds. And of course, when he did his little psilocybin experiment at Harvard, it really sent them, off the walls, and they came in with guns blazing to get these chemicals and stuff off the street. But that is a perfect example of the power that these compounds have to alter society and move it into a different direction. And that's why the shamanistic mindset is so important and so powerful. And that's why when shamans come into this culture and they examine the culture, say in the United States, and they look in like mental health facilities, they'll be like, these people don't have schizophrenia, or whatever you call it, that is essentially a synonym for being insane. These people are just, they're muses, they're wise, they have abilities beyond what you're able to conceptualize with the linguistic structures that this culture specifically uses. So that's a really amazing way to try to understand why the culture that we live in is so toxic and so far away from what we would refer to as the truth, or a way of interacting and connecting with one another. And that's another reason why I've had to take the relationalist perspective from a philosophical angle, because it's one of the things that people in this cultural mindset, the way that they've been programmed, are more likely to respond to, because it's more on the surface and hard-hitting. The best way I can see to connect with people, because they haven't opened up those innate abilities that they have to connect. They haven't been really able to experience their emotions. So this is a way to kind of tap into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're onto something with this. I hope other people watching this think of ways that we can somehow get this more out there, this way of thinking of how we can sort of try to wake people up. As I said earlier, like they're literally brainwashed in a cult, and anyone who's known anyone in other cults, like say Hare Krishna or whatever, what other things they call cults, when it's nowhere near as bad as the cult of statism, it's really hard to get them out of it. But one thing that I've always noticed, even with people, I've known a few people who've said they've been in what they call cults. I don't see any difference between Hare Krishna and Catholicism and statism, really. But the thing that kind of broke them out is someone kind of connected with them on a level, emotional connection level, and started, if they went up to them and said, hey, you're in this cult and you're bad, that's not going to ever make them want to leave the cult. And statism is a cult, so we have to find different ways to get people out of it. If we want to find ways to get people out of it, we don't have to. We could just sort of live in this hell, and it's going to get worse and worse, and we could do that as well. But I don't know. I figure we got to do something while we're here. We might as well try to wake people up, see if we can change this thing. And I think we are actually having a lot of success. I think even this conversation we're having wasn't being had 10 years ago. No. The whole conversation on even anarchy wasn't being had 10 years ago, except for with a few people like Murray Rothbard in a living room with 8 other people. Now it's going worldwide. So there is an awakening going on. And I think your angle on things is how we can help to get it going even faster. Right.
Yeah, because like we said, obviously we think the logical elements, what I just call the LEM vectors, which is the logical, economic, and moral vectors, do have their place, and there are people who are more susceptible to listening to those particular ideas and those avenues in order to help change and augment them. But of course, there's also the people who need the emotional availability of others in order to come on board. And one of the groups there's a couple of different groups of people, but females. A lot. You've had a discussion with several people about the inability of anarchists to persuade women to get more involved in anarchism. And I can look on all of my pages, and it's usually a 75 to 25% ratio. Like there's 75% men following the pages, whereas 25% of the women follow the pages. So I've wanted to really open up this avenue to women because, and this is a stereotype, but there is some truth to it. I think women want to have more of an emotional connection with people. They want to really activate their caregiving and their nurturing side in order to make connections with people. So I'm really hoping to break open that element and create more communities that are more accepting of women, because a lot of times when women start hearing these in my experience, when they start hearing these strict arguments and then these really abstract economic theories, they bow out, they lose, they're not interested. And of course there are men like this too who don't really have any interest in it, because I'm more of a feeler or an experientialist, if you will, and that's kind of the area now, and that's kind of the area that I enjoy coming from in order to get people more involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's very interesting about female, women, a difference between men and women. Of course, now with the political correctness, which I don't have to do because I'm apolitical, so I can say whatever I want, is that we're all supposed to be the same, but we're not. We're absolutely not the same. Even just individuals are not the same. None of us are the same, and that's actually a beautiful thing. And women, for the most part, stereotype or generally, are a bit more emotional, more empathetic, more those sort of things. And men generally are a little bit more, logical, rational, hard-headed, that sort of angle. I don't know how to quite describe it. You're more psychological minded, but you know what I'm saying, that is the case. And so if we could find different ways to hit those different areas, because of course we're not going to have a revolution without women. So let's try to get it. So, and I don't want to be a part of a revolution without women. I personally really like women. I think they're awesome. I like them all around all the time. I like to see them. They're beautiful. And I also like the inner parts of them as well, and how they're different that way. I think it's all beautiful. It all can be beautiful, but we need to find different ways to get these sort of people woken up to it. And I think we are. I think the Bernie Sanders supporters are going through their Ron Paul moment right now. That's a whole other opportunity, by the way, for people watching this. A lot of the people on Anarchast for the last 4 years are on Anarchast because they were Ron Paul supporters who realized the whole system's rigged. Now we've got all the Bernie people. These are mostly younger people, a lot of women as well, who just thought Bernie was going to save us all. Now they're saying, oh, the whole system's rigged. So let's bring more how they need to hear things. They're way more emotional minded. They need to hear the emotional argument. They don't even care about the logical or rational argument. If that part falls in line with the emotional, that we want to help people, which we do. We want to see everyone. We don't want to see anyone in this world starving or impoverished. And of course, we have the logical reasons why anarchy will fix that, but we need to approach it from more of the emotional angle. So I'm trying to give people ideas out there, so more people like you, Sterlin, will start up and do more things like this, and we'll soon have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. Maybe I'm a dreamer, but I think we can actually do this.
I think we're already onto it. And this reminds me of something. One of the things that the state apparatus does, and by the state apparatus I mean all the politicians involved, the cops, and people in culture who involve themselves in this thought process, because people's emotional abilities to connect with others are compromised because of all this nonsense, they're easily manipulated, right? So what I'm saying to do is we counter the manipulative tactics of the state and of culture at large, and use genuine and authentic and caring relationships to make connections with people that there is no ulterior motive. I mean, I guess you could say trying to move in toward anarchism is an ulterior motive, but it's really not, because it's just the natural state of things anyway. It's how most people already choose to interact, as many philosophers and anarchists before us have articulated. So that's, I think, one of the points of primacy that I want to put out there for people. We just have to try to love everybody, even if it's just an acquaintance, like it's a business relationship. And you and I, Jeff, we don't know each other well, but I feel like I can have a connection with you because I'm able to talk to you, because we're able to really get on a level, on an even keel with one another. And that's just super important. And online, it is most prevalent. It's real easy. It's super easy for the worst parts of you to come out online, because you don't really have to show your whole self and get your whole body involved with another person. Instead, it's just communication on internet, and you can treat people like absolute dog shit if you want to. And that's one of the things where I've made the most impact, I think. I talk to people online. Sometimes I'll get into a logical argument with people because I still think it's important, and I really try to analyze the people that I'm talking to and see what's going to be more beneficial. But when I come across and I empathize with people, I'm compassionate, and I don't react to their insults and their attacks on me, I think they're really taken aback by that. It's almost completely unexpected, and I've tried to really engender this community where I come from. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually thinking about that today. I was watching one of millions of police brutality videos I've seen, another one, and I was thinking how I'd react if I was around that situation. It was this kid who was riding down the street, sidewalk on his bike, and he got just beat up by the cops because they wanted his identification. He said, why, the whole story, and then they end up getting beat up by them and stuff. And you could just tell these cops were playing out this violent idea in their mind that's probably been driven into them since the time they were born. They were probably beaten as kids. They're probably beaten up in school. This is probably why they're doing these things and reenacting these situations now. That's sort of how they were trained. Right. So I was thinking about how I would interact. And of course, in the moment, it's pretty much impossible to do this. But if I knew those cops outside of the moment, once the emotions and everything got down a little bit, I'd say, wow, do you ever wonder, did something happen to, what happened? When you were younger, did you get beat up a lot? And they'd go, yeah, I did. And I'd be like, oh man, that's terrible. And It's like, here's why that's bad. And I know it sounds like I'm kind of being sarcastic here, but I would actually talk to them in a very empathetic way and say, oh my God, that's terrible. It really is terrible. And what happens is in society, this sort of propagates over and over because of that. And have that connection with them. And that's how we should be talking. Whereas a lot of other people would say, we should just kill those cops. And I'm like, okay, well, that's another way. But that's probably not going to fix the problem as much as actually having an empathetic conversation with these people. And it's probably not going to work overnight. You're not going to meet a cop and tell them, hey, you're evil or anything. And you never do that, obviously. But you're not going to be able to empathize with them. And the next day they quit their job or they just refuse to go on drug raids anymore or things like that. But you can start to roll the ball in that direction by being more empathetic and by not calling them pigs and all that kind of stuff, and say they are individuals as well. They're incredibly mind controlled and brainwashed and damaged individuals, but they are also individuals. And the only way we can really fully get to the point where I think we'd like to get to is by having a connection with all those people to help them get out of it, as opposed to attacking them.
Right. Yeah, you absolutely nailed it, because we know most anarchists are right now, and this is just based on observation, we can be really hair trigger, especially when it comes to cops, because that for anarchists, that's a trigger word. When you say cop, oh no, let's get rid of that motherfucker right now. We got to get away from that. And it's we can't lose our cool and go batshit crazy in the moment because it's a cop. That's not all that's going to do is have, as we've talked about earlier, is have the opposite of our intended effect. Whenever you go and start saying you're a killer and a murderer, maybe later on down the road they would start thinking about that, but then they're going to remember the kind of person you were. They're going to internalize the way that you treated them, and they're going to say, that can't be right. That guy was just being an asshole to me. I know I'm doing right, so I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. But and this is another part of psychology, whenever we behave in an empathetic manner, whenever we behave in an authentic and genuine manner to other people based on our emotional capabilities, what we're doing is modeling, right? We're activating another person's mirror neuron system, which allows them to see what we're doing and then to imitate and mimic what we're doing. And that right there, I think, is part of the neurological/psychological process of helping people understand and make changes in their own life in regards to anarchism. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We can't continue to look at cops in this light where they're these just destructive, evil sociopaths. And sure, there's probably that element of sociopathy based on cultural conditioning and this matrix delusion that we live in that you talked about. But yeah, being aggressive won't change anything. And in my opinion, most of the top tier anarchists right now, and I agree completely with their logical position. We've already discussed that, but their modus operandi is to really break down these cops and tell them what evil assholes they are, or politicians, what pieces of shit they are. And I'm sorry, but all that's doing is regurgitating the nastiness of your own past and applying it to these cops. Sure, we're all being aggressed against, but there's no way we're going to change that aggression by being vocally aggressive and really upset about it. We've got to get in there and we've got to make connections with them. We've got to empathize. We've got to show that we've rebuilt our own attachment schemas in order to make connections with people.
Yeah, absolutely. As always, it appears the change begins with you. That is a sort of a saying that's I've heard throughout my life in different forums, but that actually is the case. When you change the world around you. It's quite phenomenal. And one of the things I've noticed in riots and stuff or protests is sometimes a lot of people throw like rocks at the police and stuff. I saw one where this person came up with a mirror and just held it up to their face. And so they had to just basically look at themselves all in their riot gear with their hockey helmets and their stern faces. They had to look at themselves. And I thought that was a different approach that was good, because that's sort of making them do that. But at the same time, they're being surrounded by people shouting at them and stuff. So they're not going to be thinking too much about if what I'm doing is correct or not. But if along with things like the mirror, you just start talking to them like, oh, hey, John, like, how did you manage to end up here? And like, hi, my name is Jeff. I know this is crazy, but if we can just chat here, like, how'd you end up here? Like, how did you end up being a police officer? And they'll be, well, my dad was a police officer. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, just start empathize and talk to them and figure out why they're doing the things they're doing, and then you can start to lead them out of the path of darkness. So Sterlin, I'd like to keep these a little shorter. Everyone's got ADD, which is probably another topic we could talk about psychologically. I don't think it's actually a disease or anything. It's just the way the world is today, where we're surrounded by constant information. And that's another reason people should get into things like meditation, go take a walk in the woods, and maybe even look into taking the little red pill every now and then just to get out of this sort of just constant bombardment of information. But why don't you just finish up with anything you want to talk about to finish on, and then let people know about where they can find out more information on the Psychological Anarchist and anything else you're doing.
Sure, absolutely. Well, just to really get a brief snippet of my ideas behind psychiatry, you mentioned ADD, ADHD. Psychiatry is part of the fallout of statism, in my opinion. It is the enterprise of pathologizing and stigmatizing people who are trying to escape and trying to wake up from this nonsense, or people who are so hurt and so distant and so unable to connect with other people that they've become basically inured with soul sickness, which is what we would refer to as depression. So society's knee-jerk reaction to this, or psychiatry's knee-jerk reaction to this, is to say that they're sick, that they have a mental illness or a mental disease. And without going into a lot of details, it's impossible for an individual to have a mental illness or a mental disease, because a mind can't be sick. A mind is an abstraction. A mind is an emergent process based on neurological functioning. It's a byproduct of the totality of our emotions, our behavior, and our thinking processes. So unlike a biological organism or a tissue, it can't be sick. So all that is a subjective evaluation that psychiatrists make to paint people in a corner and make them feel like there's something wrong with them, rather than something wrong with the piece of shit culture that we live in, right? So that's a huge problem. One of the reasons why I focus on psychiatry is because I think that it is exacerbating the situation of statism by making people who are different from the current culture that we live in feel like they're not properly well adjusted to the sickness of the current culture we live in. So it's this sort of this deep irony that's embedded in society, and psychiatry is like here to say, hey, I'm here to gloss over the problems and judge other people as the cause of the problems, or they're the individuals that have issues with themselves. It's too bad for them that they can't fit in. So, and this is the whole thing, of course, with the diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders that psychiatrists use to diagnose. It's not based on evaluations of objective measures or any kind of biological measures at all. It's based on symptomatic behaviors, thinking, emotions, etc., and the time periods that people have those. So there's not an actual illness there. And so this is me coming from a positive standpoint, saying that no, you're not sick. Your brain's not broken. You're just different. You may have problems with everyday living, and of course, it doesn't surprise me that people have problems with everyday living, because this is a really rough culture that we live in. Life is not easy at all, and there are individuals who have made it a lot more treacherous than it could possibly be. So let's look at psychiatry under a different light and understand what it is and why it works with the state the way that it works with, and why things like civil commitment, which means basically putting people in asylums that are like prisons without any kind of due process or anything. So maybe in another we'll get to delve more into that later. Anyway, like Jeff said, my name's Sterlin Lujan. You can find me on psychologic-anarchist.com, Facebook page, psychologic-anarchist, and I recently started my YouTube channel for vlogging, and it is also psychologic-anarchist. And what we're really looking at is the relationships that we can make with people, how we can connect with people, and how we can make people feel not stigmatized or pathologized because everyone in their life has made them feel guilty and like they're the part of the problem when they're really not.
Absolutely. Great conversation, Sterlin. I had a feeling that I would enjoy talking to you, and I really did. That was awesome. I look forward to seeing you here at Anarchapulco 2017, end of February. We'll be announcing that soon. Maybe we can even have you on in the meantime, because I think there's so much more we can talk about this topic. This is not a 1 hour topic by any means. So that was great. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, share down below. And I'm serious, just hit like. That's all you have to do. I can see you sitting there. You're eating Doritos. And here's the funny part. There probably is one guy eating Doritos right now. And he's like, shit, they're watching me. It's the NSA. No, I can't see you, but I'm just guessing that you're sitting there eating Doritos. But, just hit like. That's all you got to do. Like, it's so easy to change the world now. If you like this information, if you think this information is important, just hit like, just hit share. That's all you got to do. You don't have to fight wars. You don't have to go out and, get your sword or your machine gun and go off to some other country and kill people to the so-called, defend freedom or whatever they say you're supposed to do. All you got to do is spread this information. That's how we can get this information out there. So please help people like us to spread it. Like, subscribe, share. Please just hit it right now. Just do it. Just move your fingers. It's not that hard. How lazy are you? And also please like Sterlin's website and check it out. It's amazing stuff. I really enjoy following him. He's on Facebook as well. He posts really interesting stuff, sort of Larkin Rose, sort of like, oh, I never thought about it that way kind of stuff all the time. So check him out. And so that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
Well, as you said, libertarians tend to be introverted, shy, and not really forthcoming. So I help people who have unassertiveness and shyness problems. And to explain to you, Jeff, how I do that, I'd like to back up and just give you an idea of the model I work with.
Sure, take your time.
Which can be applied to a variety of areas. In fact, I think it was at a capitalism and morality conference that you were at that I gave a talk called Emotional Freedom in One Lesson. And that's based on Hazlitt's book, Economics in One Lesson, where in the first chapter he gives a lesson.
Gaddafi was not a good guy. Neither was Saddam Hussein, and neither is Bashar al-Assad. I mean, they're all criminals, but they're absolutely no worse than the people that are running the U.S. government or any other governments. No difference at all. They're the same personality types. Absolutely, no difference at all.
They're just
and the average stupid American.
From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.